Hey there everyone, welcome back to Crypt Finder. So if you were just tuning into this particular video, you're going to see this is actually block 2 of a group of psychological thrillers from the 1960s and the 1970s that I wanted to showcase. So if you happen to miss the first episode, it will be linked at the end of this video and also in the description down below. You can go back and give that a watch because I talk a little bit about why I'm sort of spotlighting these particular films. So give that a watch. But the water's fine. We're going to dive right on in to the deep end. Now, these, just like the first block, right? These are 10 films that happen to fall in chronological order. It's a nice mix of films from the 60s and 70s. But the first one I'm starting off with just happens to be one of my absolute favorites from 1968. It is No Way to Treat a Lady. Blending psychological thrills with a lot of dark comedy, No Way to Treat a Lady is a stylish and offbeat thriller. It's focusing on a series of strangulations that are terrorizing New York City, all being committed by a killer who has a real flair for disguise and a twisted sense of theatricality. This is playing just a bit on the Boston Strangler. Those murders were committed from 1962 to 1964, but here the murderer, who is played with a lot of chilling charisma by Rod Steiger, he adopts various personas to charm his way into victims' homes, making each crime feel personal and also perversely performative. Hot on his trail is Detective Morris Brummel, who's played by George Zigo. He's a persistent but underappreciated cop, navigating both the pressure of the case and his overbearing mother, played to perfection by Eileen Eckhart. As Brummel closes in, the film becomes a psychological duel between two men shaped by their relationships with domineering maternal figures. Directed by Jack Smite and based on the novel by William Goldman, No Way to Treat a Lady walks a real tonal tightrope here. You've got suspense, you've got sardonic humor, and character-driven tension. Steiger's flamboyant, eerie performance contrasts beautifully with Siegel's grounded, emotionally complex detective, creating a cat-and-mouse story that's as psychological as it is procedural. Underrated, way ahead of its time, this film offers a smart, stylish take on the serial killer genre before it even became a cinematic staple. And frankly, it's a tour de force for Steiger, who gets to have a lot of fun showing off his acting chops. Doris Roberts, Murray Hamilton, and also Lee Remick co-star in this film. I highly suggest checking this one out. By the way, for folks of a certain generation, the Helen Reddy song, Ain't No Way to Treat a Lady, totally different. That song came out in 1974. It has no connection to this film whatsoever. Up next from 1969 is The House That Screamed, a brooding blend of gothic horror and psychological thriller. This is a stylish, unsettling Spanish film set in a 19th century French boarding school for troubled young girls. Run with cold discipline by the stern headmistress Madame Fourneau, who's played by Lily Palmer, the institution hides a cruel undercurrent beneath its refined, prim and proper surface. The arrival of a new student, Teresa, soon exposes the strange rules, the harsh punishment, and tightly controlled environment that define life at the school. As tensions grow among the girls, with jealousies and secret alliances and a lot of sexual repression simmering just beneath the surface, a darker mystery unfolds. Students are disappearing one by one under mysterious circumstances. Madame Fourneau's protective obsession with her sheltered son, Louis, really adds to the web of psychological unease and emotional control that really defines the house. Louise, by the way, is played by John Mulder Brown. You might recognize him. He was Anton from Hammer Films' Vampire Circus in 1971. Directed by Narcisco Ibanez Serrador, the film is notable for its elegant direction, the rich atmosphere, the haunting use of silence and space. While rooted in Gothic tradition, It does anticipate the slasher genre with its structure and the thematic sort of content, making it feel a little bit ahead of its time. If it was Italian, we'd probably place this in the giallo context, but The House That Screamed, it's a slow, suspenseful burn. It explores themes of repression and control and identity with an interesting, if not totally unexpected payoff. If you're more comfortable with gothic aesthetics with occasionally bursts of violence, this one definitely plays out a little bit like a subdued slasher film with a touch of mystery. Next up from 1970, And Soon the Darkness. Set against the sun-soaked but isolating backdrop of rural Argentina, this movie is a tense and elegant psychological thriller that follows two young British women, Jane and Kathy. They're on a holiday getaway. Eager to explore the countryside on their own, they set off on a cycling trip. But when Kathy mysteriously disappears, Jane is left alone and desperate to find her. As Jane searches through empty villages and remote landscapes, she encounters suspicious locals and a mounting sense of danger, but no clear answers. The film builds suspense through its stark contrast. You've got the bright, sunny environment clashing with the dark undercurrent of menace and isolation. The lingering presence of unseen threats and the psychological unraveling of the protagonist are portrayed with subtlety and restraint. Directed by Robert Fust, And Soon the Darkness combines minimalist storytelling, but with that creeping sense of dread. It's got a haunting score. The cinematography is good. It elevates the film beyond a typical thriller, making it sort of an underrated gem of the early 70s suspense. And it expertly balances atmosphere with a lot of psychological tension. Next is Play Misty for Me from 1971. This was directed by and starring Clint Eastwood in his directorial debut. This is a gripping psychological thriller. It dives into the dark consequences of obsession. Eastwood plays Dave Garver here. He's a smooth-talking radio DJ from Monterey, California. He lives a very carefree bachelor lifestyle, but that routine is suddenly upended with the arrival of a seemingly charming fan named Evelyn, who's played by Jessica Walter. She shows up at his workplace and quickly becomes entangled in his personal life. What begins as a casual romance soon spirals into a nightmare as Evelyn's infatuation turns dangerously obsessive. She refuses to accept rejection, and her increasingly erratic and threatening behavior forces Dave to confront a terrifying reality. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats come from those closest to us. This film is a tense cat-and-mouse game that really blends the simmering suspense of a stalker thriller with a psychological drama. Play Misty for Me is notable for its tight pacing, the atmospheric California coastal setting, and a memorable jazz soundtrack that underscores the mounting tension. It was one of the earliest films to explore obsessive stalking years before Fatal Attraction would burst on the scene, of course, and it remains a real pioneering and influential work in the genre. I'm sorry, what was that? Did you just say you wanted more Clint Eastwood? Okay, well then we've got to do it. From 1971, the film is The Beguiled. This was directed by Don Siegel and again starring Clint Eastwood. It's actually one of his most complex and morally ambiguous roles. The Beguiled is a Southern Gothic psychological thriller, simmers with a lot of tension and desire and manipulation. Set during the American Civil War, the story unfolds at an isolated all-girls boarding school in rural Mississippi, where the sheltered residents, a mix of students and also the female caretakers, including a great performance by Geraldine Page, they discover a wounded Union soldier in the nearby woods. Despite being the enemy, the soldier is taken in and nursed back to health by the head mistress, a repressed and authoritative woman, and her emotionally starved staff and pupils. As he recovers, the presence of a man in their cloistered world stirs a lot of feelings of attraction and jealousy and resentment. The soldier, who is very aware of his effect on these women, began to manipulate their affections, but the balance of power is fragile, and the atmosphere grows increasingly claustrophobic and volatile. This was shot in lush, shadowy tones. It subverts Eastwood's usual tough guy persona and explores themes of sexual repression, vulnerability, psychological warfare. It's a haunting, morally murky film. It builds slowly, but toward a very unforgettable conclusion. It's kind of a bold, underrated entry in early 70s American thrillers. There was a very unnecessary remake in 2017 that featured a great cast, but didn't really bring anything new to the table, so I would just stick to the original. From 1971, up next, we have the film Unman, Wittering, and Zigo. When idealistic young teacher John Ebony is played here by David Hemmings, he has some really wonderful acting choices. His eyes are just able to convey so much sometimes without speaking. But he arrives at a prestigious but tradition-bound boys' boarding school to take over a recently vacated post, and he's eager to make a good impression. Now, by the way, if you're confused about the title of the film, Unman, Wittering, and Zigo happen to be the last three surnames on his class roster. Almost immediately, he finds his new class. They're a group of unnervingly composed senior students. They're resistant to his authority and disturbingly cryptic in their behavior. They speak in cold, clinical tones and almost seem to operate as a single hive-like unit. Then comes a very chilling suggestion. The boys claim that they murdered his predecessor, and they might do the same to him unless he does exactly what they say. As Ebony tries to uncover the truth, as in, is this childish behavior just a way to intimidate the new teacher? Or did the class actually conspire, plan alibis, and throw their teacher off a cliff? And he's met with a lot of indifference from the school staff and from his wife. There's just the growing fear that he may be entirely out of his depth here. The film builds a slow, cerebral kind of tension. It's examining the dynamics of power and group psychology and institutional denial. With a taunt script adapted from Giles Cooper's acclaimed radio play and strong performances here, particularly from David Hemmings in the lead. Unman, Wittering, and Zigo is a deeply unsettling psychological thriller. It really lingers long after you've watched it. It's well worth checking out. Another great film that has just fallen off of everybody's radar for far too long. Next, we have a moody psychological thriller from Hammer Studios. It is Fear in the Night from 1972. A fragile young woman named Peggy, she's played by Judy Keeson, who also appeared in To Sir with Love. She recently was recovering from a nervous breakdown, and she moves to a remote boys' boarding school with her new husband, Robert Heller, who's played here by Ralph Bates. And you might remember him from Taste the Blood of Dracula and Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. He's just taken a job at this school, but isolated in the countryside, surrounded by empty dormitories during the school's off-season, Peggy begins to experience some very strange incidents, including encounters with a mysterious gloved assailant who has a prosthetic arm. As the tension builds, she really begins to wrestle with the idea, is she just relapsing here and having another nervous breakdown, or is something much more sinister happening around her? Produced, directed, and co-written by Jimmy Sangster, the movie features Joan Collins and Peter Cushing as Molly and Michael Carmichael. Fear in the Night blends the psychological unease with gothic undertones in a very tightly wound mystery. When this movie actually debuted in the U.S., it was double billed with Demons of the Mind. You might remember that because I talked about that film in the first block of these underrated thrillers from the 60s and 70s. When it was released in the U.K., it was also double billed with another movie with some similar themes, a film called Straight On Till Morning. Next up, we have a twisted fairy tale, all wrapped in vintage Gothic style from 1972. The movie is Whoever Slew Annie Rue. This is a psychological thriller with macabre undertones, a nod very much to the classic story Hansel and Gretel. This is set in post-World War I England, and the film follows Rosie Annie Rue Forrest, who's played by Shelley Winters. She's a wealthy American widow living in a decaying mansion. Every Christmas, Rue hosts a lavish holiday party for a group of local orphans, but beneath her outward generosity and eccentric charm lies a woman deeply grieving over the loss of her daughter and also harboring a pretty fragile grip on reality. When two streetwise siblings, Christopher and Katie, end up at the party, they quickly begin to realize that something is a little bit off about their hostess. As Rue becomes increasingly obsessed with the young girl Katie, seeing her as kind of a stand-in for her dead daughter, the film gradually shifts into darker territory. The children begin to fear they may never leave the house, and their suspicion may not be misplaced. Directed by Curtis Harrington, the film walks a fine line between camp and creepiness, with Shelley Winters delivering an unhinged and yet oddly sympathetic performance, with the eerie mansion and the wintry setting and the child's eye view of adult madness. Whoever Slew Annie Rue is a chilling and atmospheric little flick in the early 70s psychological thriller canon. At number 2 on our list from 1973 is Don't Look Now. This is directed by Nicholas Roeg, masterful, deeply atmospheric psychological thriller that really explores grief. The story follows a married couple, John and Laura Baxter, who's played by Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie. They travel to Venice after the sudden and tragic death of their young daughter. While John works on restoring a crumbling church, both are haunted emotionally and perhaps supernaturally by her absence. In the decaying labyrinth of canals of Venice, the couple encounter two elderly sisters, and one of whom claims to be a psychic and insists that their daughter is trying to contact them from beyond. Laura is drawn to this idea as a source of comfort, but John remains very skeptical. As he begins to experience strange visions, though, including sightings of a mysterious figure in a red coat, the boundaries between reality and memory and premonition begin to collapse. With its haunting visuals, fragmented editing, emotionally raw performances, Don't Look Now is as much a meditation on loss and psychological disintegration as it is a suspenseful mystery. Nicholas Roeg's use of nonlinear storytelling, the symbolic imagery, the eerie atmosphere creates a film that's both intellectually very rich, but viscerally it's unsettling. It's widely regarded as one of the greatest psychological thrillers ever made, and for good reason. Really, it's a movie that's too well known to end up on this list, but I was also really afraid that either people had just forgotten about it or we were so far removed from when this film came out, people just didn't know about it. So I felt like, yeah, it was still fair to keep it on the list. And finally, from 1973, the movie The Baby. Now, this is one of the more bizarre and unsettling psychological thrillers of the early 70s. It tells the story of a social worker named Anne Gentry who takes on the case of the Wadsworth family. We have a matriarch, two adult daughters, and Baby, a fully grown man who behaves like an infant. Kept in a crib, bottle-fed, and unable to speak, Baby's condition seems to be developmental, but Anne begins to suspect that something far stranger, perhaps even more sinister, is going on. As Anne digs deeper into the Wadsworth unsettling domestic world, she begins to uncover disturbing truths about the family, their control over Baby, and their resistance to any outside interference. The situation grows increasingly tense as obsession and manipulation begin to blur the lines between caregiver and captor. This is directed by Ted Post, and it's part domestic melodrama, part exploitation thriller, but it's got an eerie tone. It's a bold premise. You've got unnerving performances. The film is really going to challenge viewers' expectations and their discomfort levels. Beneath its pulp surface lies a grim exploration of dependency, control, and identity, really making it one of the strangest and most memorable cult thrillers of the decade. If you happen to see my video on 8 underrated psychological thrillers that I posted last year, you'll know that The Window from 1949 was on that list, and Ruth Roman happened to be in that film. She was one of the killers upstairs terrorizing poor little Bobby Driscoll. And she's in this movie as well. She plays the matriarch, this very tough as nails kind of woman that you would not want to mess with. I think that's going to do it for us for right now, everybody. Please hit the like and subscribe button. You can subscribe. It's free. It's fine. And then you'll be notified. The next block that I'll be dropping, block 3, will again be a mix of 60s and 70s type films. We'll come back and do this all over again. So until next time, everybody, stay curious and stay scared.